看到就 Victoria，我现在这个脸有没有要？
没有，你的头像是在里面的。
All right, greetings everyone. Today I will enjoy my project. Today I will attend this lecture, which will introduce the lecture characteristics of Virginia Woolf, a renowned British writer in the Victorian age. I'm more than delighted to have you attending this lecture. Without further ado, our lecture will commence now. The focus other than her life will be the usage of the concept of stream of consciousness. Yeah, you can see here the slide are incomplete, but their main focus will be the usage of a concept of stream of consciousness. All right. Today I will first of all I will illustrate this genealogy of Virginia Woolf. The father of Virginia Woolf is Leslie Stephen, as you can see at the top of the figure, and which the second partner of Leslie Stephen, they give birth to Vanessa Stephen and Virginia Woolf. And Virginia Woolf has two partners. The first one is Leonard Sonny Woolf, and the second one, which is her mistress is Victoria Mary Shockwell West, which who had an affair with Virginia Woolf. We will introduce her in the second lecture. So let's look at some keyword and key events. First of all, the first keyword we will be focusing is the Bloomsbury group. It is a group of intellectuals, of philosophers, of writers. Briefly speaking, it is a club, and in the First World War, during the First World War, in the Second World War, in the British Intellectual Club, and it has been renamed as Memoir Group later on. And we will briefly introduce Vita Saxwell West in the second lecture. Leonard Sonny Woolf is the main partner of Victoria Woolf, who helped her with her bipolar disorder, and later on witnessed her suicide. And we will introduce the concept of feminism in the room of one's own in the third lecture. But in this lecture, we will introduce the concept of stream of consciousness. So, first of all, let's discuss the distinction of Woolf. In other words, we'll separate her from other writers. So if you have some basic understanding of Western of the literature in the 20th century, you will know that there's three persons who has an intensive usage of the technique of stream of consciousness. The first person is Joyce from the island. And the second person is, William Faulkner in the United States, where his masterpiece is is I lie dying. So the third one, who's from Britain, is our main focus today, Virginia Woolf. So she is famous from the narrative mode, the stream of consciousness. And this technique is featured in the milestone paper of William James in 1919. You can see in the reference, the second piece of reference, a stream of consciousness psychology, MIT Press. So for beginning, for a general audience, the concept of stream of consciousness may be confusing. Isn't every writing as an embodiment of consciousness? Well, indeed, whilst you might argue that every writing as such, the narrative mode is distinctive because of the stream at the first glance. But what about consciousness? Oftentimes, we would picture consciousness as something stagnant, something that is still, not moving, something that is so distinctive that has a clear form. But that is far from reality. Indeed, we might say that consciousness is like a tool. It's like a tool. It is something written in paper, but that's not what we actually see in reality. So, William James, as the definer of the very concept, has argued the ambiguity of stream of consciousness, which is defined by this finger, is something so in between, not something reciprocal independent from the mind of each other, but neither mutually connected. So what does that even mean? It may be really confusing that every state tends to be a part of personal consciousness. Let me illustrate this better. So right now, you are probably watching me in a computer monitor. And I'm having a conversation with you. Right now, I'm thinking about how to express the concept of stream of consciousness to you, and you are probably contemplating what I've said before. Like for this moment, I'm trying to explain this concept to you, and you are thinking, well, you cannot understand what I said. So I'm going to leave the professor alone and never mind the factless definition, he said. That's probably what you're thinking right now, ignoring what I'm saying right now. So we can see that even though mindset is around this very concept of stream of consciousness, however, our mind are mutually connected, like because we are thinking about the same thing. But in the meantime, our mind is reciprocal independent because we are thinking from different perspective. Like I'm thinking how to illustrate this concept to you. However, you are thinking how to understand this concept from me. So, but however, we can notice here that everyone thinks different things. So all stream of consciousness is different from the personal experience of others. So you can notice the pattern here. Your idea is interlude with mine. We're thinking about the same thing here. There's something common in your mind. So, but by no means indicate our minds are alike. Since you are going to have your take on this regard, whilst I already have my preset in my mind. Let's call the first attribution of stream of consciousness that every state tends to be a part of personal consciousness. Whilst all of us think differently, all of us think in a way that is connected with each other. However, what does we think? What's the content and nature of our thoughts? I've encountered some ASP, that is some person with Asperger's syndrome, who claim that society is weird, since that everyone think in different way, say, than a normative way. That is, everyone think in a formula, or in other words, a certain element would result in certain emotion. It's as if that is a solution, an equation. Like if you have a certain X and you have a certain Y, you will have a certain result. So that's not true, because our world is really complicated. And frankly, if you are going to think in a physical way, there's many equations that you cannot solve. Seeing a dead person, it would evoke the feeling of mourning and grief. But that does not hold in reality, where people think in entirely different manner, even in random manner, and get a different result. In real life, everyone has a different thinking method. States are quite the same, which in our expectation, like we can reasonably expect people would mourn when they see a close one dead. But the orange can vary. Some will feel fear when they see the hearse or the coffin. Some will feel depressed when they see the dead body. Likewise, an object can evoke different feelings for different people, as I mentioned before. But even for the same person, an object can evoke different feelings and different sensations. With respect to time, occasion, and other external factors, the formula or the brain will yield different sensations. Not to mention that the brain is constantly changing both psychologically and physiologically. So let me illustrate this better. When we see something like a cup, hold on a second. So sometimes we see, some people will see that this cup is half full. However, another part of people will say that it's half empty. So I would say that the mindset, the equation differs because our mind, our brain differs, both psychologically and sociologically. And like I will illustrate this better by using a quote from the ancient Greece, a philosopher from ancient Greece whose name is Heraclitus. He said that no man ever stepped in the same river twice, but it is now the same river, and he's now the same man. So, since we could not discuss this in the term of metaphysics or epistemology, because we only have a short class, nobody can have the same feeling for the same object. Chinese people have a verse for these two. 乘日月之几何，新江山之不可复思议. So, let's take this example. Let's take an example to understand this better. I once had a letter from my lambesty, Madame Zhang, In the first time I saw it was like 7 years ago. The first time would be very exciting for me since I had no reading violin. Since you received a parcel from a unknown person and you don't know what's in it, so you naturally get very excited. The second time I was rather intrigued by the letter because I have seen it for a time before. The third time I saw it, it invokes a feeling of grand sadness, since I feel sad for the person, the Ning in earlier, who had written the letter. Because, well, by the time I was have some gauge with Madame Zhang, so I feel sad for myself. And now I will see it with a great feeling of reminiscent, like I was thinking about something old. Since those events has passed before, those event in before has passed, and those events does not affect me today. However, they constitute an integral part of me. So, naturally, we say that which in every personal consciousness, states are always changing, because every time we see something with a different light, so a feeling or consciousness will change, which the change of external conditions and our mindset, etc., etc. The same object. So, however, there's something in our brain that is some constant. We never doubt the consistency of the existence of something, even though it brings us a different sensation every time. We can recognize there's a sun, even though sometimes we feel too warm, sometimes we feel adequately warm. Like during summertime, we can see the sun is very warm because it's summer, and during winter time, we may think the sun is not warm enough. So, but we still, even if we feel different thing, we still recognize that it is the same song. So that is our third point, which in each personal consciousness thoughts is sensibly continuous. So if you read the original paper, we can see that this point is divided to two different points. The first point, these two bullet points raised by James seems very abstract. I will attempt to explain them better. The first point being, even there is a time gap, the consciousness after it feels as if it belongs together, which the consciousness before it as another part of the same self. Well, frankly, upon the first glance, I feel like this sentence is like a riddle. And even now, I feel it is a riddle still. So I will give an example for you. So a time gap, it is no different, no difficult to understand. Like every time we fall asleep, there's a time gap when we feel unconsciousness. And after we wake up, we still feel that consciousness is continuous because we would recognize that our mind will recognize the same feeling that is breaking through the entire thing. So hold on a second. So sorry. We can see that there's no abrupt break between the two memories. Even if, let's say, for the purpose of precision, there were to be a gap between two memories for the pure purpose of experiment of mind. Let's assume today we both fall asleep and we switch the memory, like we sleep in the same room. And remember what you remembered before, and I no longer remember anything regarding myself. After the sleeping period, I have exact knowledge about your history, but I don't feel the same. What I feel now, it is an exact result of my personality and perception. My personality is constituted by my past memory and experience, unaffected by the memory switch. I merely possess the knowledge of a memory, not associated feeling. So even if I lost my memory, I still feel the past, even if that is your past, under my light and my personality. It would be naturally conclude that my flows of my stream of consciousness is still consistent and still a part of my own self. Well, it's still really hard to understand, but let me illustrate this better. So, since our course is really short, we are not going to discuss the epistemology level of this example. Let's say I have a exact memory of you, and it's still sorry. Anyways, 那我们念稿。Like Albert Camus said, knowledge itself does not provide an explanation, whilst the explanation will not be knowledge, since it's not factual. That is to say, an emotion or sensation, or in Camus' context, a value judgment, cannot be completely factual, since it can only be produced with a grain of personality. Whilst the fact cannot be solely interpreted as a value judgment, since it produces no value without a shade of light personality, without a shade of light of personality. So even if a person loses a memory, the one can possibly possess, and personality remains intact, true to themselves. It is a subjective, imperceptive part of them decide how to deal with the fact, not the reverse, where objective, quantitative fact decide what the personality will be. All right, let me illustrate this better. So let's continue with let's proceed with the former example. Let's say today I think I have your memory. However, I will feel alienated with your memory because it is my memory. It's my memory which constitute my personality. So my personality will naturally unable to understand your memory. So we can see that even in the example where my memory is dumped the tool is still sensibly continuous, since it is not important. The fact is not important. What is important is the way we interpret the fact. So it naturally concludes that which in each personal consciousness force is sensibly continuous, because even if we have some, well, like say someone loses his memory, the consciousness, the personality is still continuous, because all consciousness is depending on the way we interpret it. Well, it comes to the second point. The change from one moment to another in the quality of the consciousness are never absolutely abrupt. So it seems pretty like self-evident, but for the sake of lecture, I will briefly cover this point, since the absolute majority have not yet read the paper. For the sake of argument, we can assume that there's a person who's wandering around, and lo and behold, here comes a thousand Su. We may call this a miracle, and the abruptness of a miracle had fallen to the mind of the person. This saying the mind of a person changed totally with no consistency? By no means. Let's understand our consciousness like a pole. It's an accumulation of different feeling and a sensation thereof. Perhaps our mind will be overwhelmed by certain event, but the previous feeling remains intact. It's a circulation, therefore, at no given point, the consciousness is spawned from abruptness. So, I think this example is a little bit far-fetched. There's using some visual. So, hold on a second. So, the cup is exactly like our mind. Uh-oh, the ink is too, never mind. The ink, sorry. Anyways, you can imagine that there's some ink in a swimming pool, and once the water can be poured into the swimming pool in a fairly fast pace, the color will remain the same, because it all has a different, let's say, a certain tool that has a different tune in it. Like for a depressed person, you can bring him a chocolate, I don't know, something like that. You can warm him using certain event. However, still the person will remain depressed for a time being. So it would be natural to conclude that the working mechanism of a consciousness is more like a stream or a flow of water than, say, a chain, since they are connected with each other with no root break. Where a series of like, rather than a chain, where a series of events appears. For the ease of mind, we're going to use the stream to denote the working mechanism of a consciousness for its smoothness and consistency. All right, so finally, we come to the final point. Consciousness is always interested in some part of its object to the exclusion of others, and welcomes or rejects, chooses from among them in a word otherwise. So it may be more different. It may be the hardest part to understand in this lecture, but it's quite easy, I'd say. In China, there's a famous quote, and it is claimed to say it by Shakespeare, but it's not. A thousand Hamlet for a thousand people. 在1000个人眼中有1000个哈姆雷特。Well, all experience are formed based on our respective perspectives and therefore differs because we subconsciously select or take from events that take place in our life. Take an example for a famous metaphor, half empty or half full. Like, sorry. Would you say this cup is half full or half empty? I don't know. This cup, without doubt, contains half water and half air. Some argue that it is half empty since their life experience form a habit to regard the shortcoming as the emphasize, whilst the rest says it is half full due to their own habit. Like I have a friend from Canada who is now in China. He said that the future of China in his eye is half full because if it were to be half empty, he wouldn't come to China. So I would say he's a optimistic person because he would regard this cup as half full. However, was me, I am a pessimistic person. I always think about the bad part of some event. So when it comes to China or Canada, first of all, I think I regard the shortcoming as my emphasis because I will see the cup is half empty. However, we can notice the fact the water contains in the cup is not changing. Our brains and experience presuppose our perspectives. That is, our life experience, the way we grew up, decides our perspectives. And these perspectives, in reverse, reinforce the foundation thereof. That is to say, if we regard this cup is half empty, and we naturally have a negative perspective to this cup, and which the time pass, our mind will regard the most thing is half empty because, well, our life experience decides our mindset. It is like an echo chamber. So if you assume this is a microphone and this is a speaker, if you put them together, there will be a sound like B, and it will be louder and louder. It is the echo chamber. Of course, and in real life, it is not always a echo chamber because we have to take other people's perspective into our consideration. So, I have illustrated I have elaborated the four attribution of stream of consciousness. Now let's bring them into practice. Oh, by the way, the plot of the lighthouse taking place in the island of Skye. It is an island in Scotland. You can see the upper part of Britain is Scotland and Lost Island. But anyways, and this is Taliska. This is a village where hosts a distiller, the whiskey brand Taliska. Anyways, that's where the story of the lighthouse taken place. And let's read this quote. This is from the final chapter from the lighthouse part of the lighthouse. And here in here, let me read this excerpt. The lighthouse was known as Slavery, means the looking tower, with a yellow eye that opened suddenly and softly in the evening. Now James looked at the lighthouse. He could see the whitewashed rocks, the tower, stark and straight. He could see that it was barred with black and white. He could see windows in it. He could even see washing straight on the rocks to dry. So that was the lighthouse, was it? No, the other was also the lighthouse. But nothing was too simply. It was simply one thing. The other lighthouse was true too. So we can see that Virginia here depletes the outlook of the lighthouse. The lighthouse in the childhood of James was slavery, misty looking tower, but now it is buried, barred, which black and white. The imagery of lighthouse was so wonderfully made in his childhood, but now it is waste, desert, black, decayed. So I see the lighthouse is merely a buzzword made to impress us. No, the lighthouse here is not merely a concept, but organic reflection and projection of the expectation and mood of those protagonists. It is a continuum, entirely continuous, in the whole plot of this novel. The keywords embodies the stream of the expectation and the growth of the protagonist. So, back to where we mentioned the four attribution of the stream consciousness, and we can see that the states of personal consciousness is always changing. You can see in the childhood of James, he regarded the lighthouse as something slavery, misty looking tower, very mysterious and very enchanted. However, it is changing. Now it is declared black and white. However, it is still continuous because it is same tower, is it? So the fourth point is plays an important role in here. It is interesting Now, in some part of it is object to the inclusion of others and workers that reject just from among them in a world otherwise. So we can see the lighthouse is unlikely to change during those years. However, James have totally different perspective to this for this lighthouse. Maybe the outlook of the lighthouse wouldn't be changing, but the way James look at the lighthouse would change very quickly. So let's look at the second quote. But said his father stopped in the front of a drawing room window. It won't be fine having an axe handy, a poker, or any weapon that would have gashed a hole in his father's breast and killed him. There and then, James would have seized it. Well, here James, at a first glance, would like to murder his father. So, but we can read along. Such were like dreams of emotion like me, Mr. Ramsey excited in his children's breast by his mere presence, standing as now lean as a knife, narrow as a blah 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 blah. But it comes to a transition of his mind. What he said was true. It was always disagreeable. He was incapable of untruths, never tampered with a fact, never altered a disagreeable word to suit the pressure of convenience of any mortal being. So, upon first hearing, James had the urge to kill his father, but gradually James come to acceptance what he said was true. At least give a perfect example through a second attribution of a stream of consciousness. Second, which in every each personal consciousness states are ever changing. We can see how James thinks. After the initial anger, he concedes the rationale of the speech of his father. He concedes that his father has a point. So I would like, I think after this class, you would probably understand the characteristic of stream of consciousness. And here's the assignment. I would like you to kindly analyze this excerpt in which the first attribution are demonstrated. So I would like to ask you kindly submit a short piece of writing. Use the technique to deplete any thinking process, maybe of your own, maybe of other people. To conclude in this lecture, we have learned the four intrinsic attributions of the stream of consciousness. They respectively are, we state, tend to be a part of personal consciousness, which in each personal consciousness states are always changing. Each personal consciousness is essentially continuous. It is interested in some part of it is object to the inclusion of others and welcomes or rejects, chooses from among them in a world otherwise. So we also learned the embodiment of these four attribution in to accept of the lighthouse. And in next nature, we are going to discuss the life of Virginia Woolf, an eventful philosophy and the tragic end of her life. It is an honor to give this lecture, and I offer my sincerest gratitude to my partner, Victoria Vivian Snyder, and I offer my sincerest gratitude for your time. I hope I could see you next lecture. Thank you.